Welcome to Origins, the podcast that dives deep into the business of venture capital, where we learn how the people behind the capital, both GPs and LPs, make decisions. I'm Beezer Clarkson, your LP co-host from Sapphire Partners, where we aim to invest in exceptional early-stage venture capital managers ranging the spectrum from emerging to established franchise VCs. And if you caught our last full episode with Adam Street's Stephen Bluestein, you now know congratulations are in order for my GP co-host Nick Charles, as he and his wife welcomed a new addition to their family. For that reason, we're missing Nick on the pod today and wish them all the best. If you didn't catch it, you should go back and listen. But we're here today to debrief our conversation with Stephen in today's Minisode edition. In Nick's stead, I'm incredibly delighted to bring on one of my favorite people to help me drive the ship, my partner at Sapphire Partners, Laura Thompson. In addition to being a brilliant investor and a wonderful member of our team, Laura is no stranger to Origins. She's also the perfect person to help me debrief our episode with Stephen and continue the conversation on franchise funds because of her experience and expertise. For those of you that don't know, before joining me at Sapphire over 6 years ago, Laura was with one of the most reputable LP firms around, Horsley Bridge Partners, where she helped the team make hundreds of millions of dollars of fund commitments. As a fellow co-founder of OpenLP, she's also consistently praised by GPs and LPs alike for her thought leadership. She writes numerous blogs that get brought up year after year for the quality of their content and their insights. We'll link a couple of her blogs, specifically on reserves and recycling, in the show notes below so you can see for yourself why her LP content has been called timeless. All of this, and she's just an all-star human, and we're pleased she's agreed to join us today. Laura, huge thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Beezer. I'm elated to be here. I'm clearly a huge fan of Origins, and it's great to be back on the show.
So I'm super excited to have you on the mic with me today because I had a fascinating conversation with Stephen on our recent episode about what it takes to become and remain a franchise fund. And I'm really looking forward to debriefing with you about it.
I enjoyed the conversation so much. I think he was the perfect person to talk about this topic with. So I can't wait to chat with you about it.
Awesome. Well, then let's dive in and we'll skip to the burning question, which is what makes a franchise fund? And that's, of course, why I brought Stephen on to talk about it. And the interesting thing is that while it's really hard to say exactly what makes a franchise fund or firm, it's obviously recognizable by a couple key indicators. And curious to you as an objective listener to the episode, what were your top one or two major takeaways?
You know, I think this is cheating because this isn't your question. But when I was listening to your really great points about what makes a franchise, it was making me wonder, why do we care? You know, is it because this is where the best returns are going to be always? Is it because it's easier to diligence for, LPs to put together a portfolio? And so, is it the best people always that are going to be at these firms? And it just made me really think about what is the franchise role in the venture ecosystem?
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, now you're making me think of a different version of that, which is what is the role a franchise fund plays for the entrepreneurs versus the LPs? Because I think it's slightly different.
I think it's different for GPs and what they want to build, different for founders and why they select, and different for LPs depending on their programs and their objectives.
Yes. I would say, well, I'm going to tie to something Stephen said that stuck out to me, which is the right to, it started with, to be a franchise fund, you must have, in his mind, an exceptional fund at some point. But just because you have an exceptional fund, which, let's assume means it's over a 5X. He didn't define it, but let's just assume. But in and of itself, that's not sufficient because then you have to capitalize on that and continue to have the right to win the best founders' time and cap table. And I presume, that's the hard part, but I presume that's why LPs want it, because the presumption, and we can unpack this if we disagree, is that because you have the right to win with the best founders, you will then deliver the best returns. But I don't know. Maybe that last part is an assumption LPs make. That's not always true.
Yeah, no, I find that fascinating because I feel like the venture landscape has changed so much. And I also, what he said about a lights out fund really resonated with me. I think he made a point about opportunity funds and then also underwriting very large funds. And clearly franchise funds come in very different types of setups. But, how do you produce like a 5X or a 10X fund with some of the fund sizes that some of the franchises have now? And so, how do people think about franchise? Can you be a franchise and deliver 2 to 3X, net returns over time? And for a lot of LPs, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So does that count? Or do you need the potential of, as he mentioned, the lights out fund?
Maybe the definition of franchise is the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I remember when I started at Sapphire, I talked to an LP that was investing in a fund, and they said, hey, listen, they're not going to be a 10X fund, but this fund they were thinking about, they said, it's going to be a consistent 2X net. I do not have to worry about them. Their charter is clear. Their mission's clear. Who they are as an investor is clear. They stay in their lane. They do the same thing every single time. They're good, trustworthy people, and know it might not be a 5X or a 10X, but I can work with them for decades and sleep well at night. And that kind of always stuck in my head because I think they would think that's a franchise, even if somebody felt that you had to have more than a 2X potential, that might not be a franchise.
If you're an LP and you construct your portfolio that way, you also don't have very many funds losing capital. Versus if you're taking a different approach, you need to have some 5 and 10X funds to offset funds that really come in sub, it's hard to do sub 1X, but come in sub 2. It's possible, but
sadly
harder.
Think possible.
And for me, there's a big difference between 2 and 3X, because if you're generating 2X, it's still good, but there's a lot of other asset classes that might be able to generate those returns. And if you really want kind of the upside in venture, is 2X enough? Although maybe AI will make 2X, 3X for everyone. I don't know.
I also thought his part about, he had a number of thoughts on people and talent, but I thought it was really interesting because he was really riffing on this idea of franchise like McDonald's or Burger King, and they have a playbook and you know how to extend it. And it didn't mean everyone came in and was cookie cutter, but it did mean everyone came into a firm and understood what the firm stood for. And to maintain your franchise status, you all kind of had to row in the same direction, even if, well, my analogy might break down. Because assuming if you're rowing, it's all the same. Even if you're working differently, you're all pushing in the same direction. And that folks don't always, when they bring new people on or when they develop their talent or increase their fund size, and that's sort of what breaks you from being a franchise fund from vintage to vintage.
That really resonated with me as well, because I think it all ties together. Also, I think he made a point like you really need to have a brand, which then ties into your identity, which then ties into you need the very best talent, but you need a talent that fits in with, you can evolve, but fits in with how your firm functions. And that is hard.
Stephen did not go there and name names with me. He was being politically correct. But when I make my secret list, I think there's only like 30 maybe names on it. And even then you kind of have to push because knowing the brand sort of ubiquity and the consistency of performance, even if it's not always a 3X, and then also has some succession or at least gearing up for succession, I mean, that winnows the playing field extraordinarily quickly.
Yeah, and I really appreciated the stats you shared in the beginning of the conversation, both about that, but then the number of emerging managers, because also with emerging managers, it takes a long time to get to know them. And it's hard to pick one, right? Because they're emerging for a reason. So if you do have an established portfolio and you're able or want to invest in this kind of smaller universe that you spoke about that has a lot of consistency, sometimes it can be hard to expand. But you're right, the universe just isn't that big of kind of however you define franchise. Even with a broader definition, it's still a small universe.
I didn't go there with Stephen, and I'm not sporty enough to do this, but you are. So when I first heard the word franchise, he was thinking McDonald's, Burger King, and I was thinking sports and like your brand franchise. And why do you want to be a franchise as and here you're going to have to help me, like a football team or a basketball team. And does that translate to venture? Because that's where we stole the term from or borrowed. And I was like, I don't know. Do we have ticket sales? Do we have swag? We have swag, but we don't sell it. I don't know. I was just kind of curious because you're much more astute when it comes to sports than I am.
Yeah, I love that. I also loved how he thought about it, although I do not like McDonald's or Arby's. So like I'm apparently not a burger franchise person. But I do think there's some analogies with sports because I think the feel of the organization, who they can recruit, who they retain, and the winning track record. If you have some legendary coaches or, people would rather play for certain NFL organizations than others. I was at the 49ers game on Sunday and we had a brutal loss, and I'm still a 49ers fan. So maybe, if the analogy is you still have a lot of loyalty because you've had success in the past as a venture fund and your LPs love what you do, that counts for a lot. And that will help you continue to build your organization.
And if I was feeling spicy, maybe I'd make an analogy between management fee growth and like swag and ticket sales and all the extra stuff that you can sell if you're a franchise. Just saying.
Don't get me started on management fees and that math. That requires drinks, sir.
It does. It does. And another point that Stephen made was about like the founding DNA and the special people that make these franchise funds, and can they pass it on? And I don't know if that works in the sports thing. Like if they're do individuals help others become better? Do coaches help others become better? Maybe.
I think they definitely do, but I don't think a good training program makes a Patrick Mahomes. I think he's also very special, and it's augmented or developed by the right program. And maybe that's true in venture. I don't think you can become a top VC with a track record of identifying, complete outliers just from a training brochure or a training program or specific. But I think it can definitely help you see what's great, learn different styles, and then, kind of assume your own style. I think seeing the best, like think about deal flow. If you never see the best deal flow, then how do you, refine your own filter? And so I do think there's a lot of similarities where it can really help you to be part of a certain organization.
What you're saying really resonates for me is that I think a lot of folks, and this is a lesson I think a lot of emerging managers learn, is that until you see what great looks like, you're missing the real, not that you can't find your way into it, but if you work somewhere in a platform where you see what great looks like, it's easier to then have that playbook on your own. And, at Sapphire, we back people that don't have that playbook, but I keep thinking sometimes folks would benefit from spending some time on a larger platform and seeing it versus having to discover it for themselves.
I think it'll be interesting, in the next couple of years, who will decide to stay with larger platforms before spinning out, who might rejoin, and who says, again, because we back people who don't, I know enough and I can get informal advisors and gain knowledge and I don't need to do it. But I do think it's a great training ground.
It's an interesting world. He made so many good points. I was really appreciative how much times he also talked about when people kind of lose their franchise status because of loss of focus or team dynamics. And I know we see that all the time, that things just get broken because of sort of more internal things, I think, than external things.
The point that you guys talked about where most people don't go into VC because they like managing and developing people. There's some wonderful managers and people who are excellent at it and for building. And I think you guys spoke about some examples, but usually people go into this because they like investing. And I do think it's just hard. It's hard to give up economics. It's hard to find the next people or person who's going to continue on with the firm. It's hard. I think that's why you see those numbers dwindle, just as you said. I'm curious, as you mentioned, we've seen a lot of people successfully do this transition and a lot that haven't. Do you think there's any, kind of special secret for what makes something successful, like how people can successfully navigate these generational transitions?
I have a hunch, but I don't know how to put data against it. You have to be really intentional and really want your firm to exist, because I think you have to make decisions. At least we've seen folks make decisions that benefit the entity that might not benefit the individual. Because to your point, you have to be willing to step back on your economics. It simply just does not work if you aren't willing to make room. But if you don't make room, you can't bring people up. And I think some things like that are just the core of what breaks. Ironically, it's weird because a lot of those people that can step back are pretty generationally wealthy at this point, and it still seems to be a struggle.
It does. It's almost like you have to do a little community service at the end for your institution to keep it going. But I think what you just said about being intentional really matters, because when you're hiring people who are up and coming, they need to see a pathway to having, if they're very good, they typically need to see a role for themselves in the firm, like a real role, and feel ownership over time. And if there's no process and potential pathway outlined, it can be really hard for people. And if they're good enough, they might want to leave.
Correct. There's a couple of firms which they haven't given me permission to name, so I can't name them, but they have literally written in, it's a little old school technique, but an age limit, and that folks literally have to retire when they hit a certain age, which feels a little draconian. But I was chatting with one of them last week, and they said it was just really important because exactly these things that if you don't write it down, you get really tempted not to do it. Because even if it's not about the economics, if you love what you do that much, it's really hard to stop. But to your point, if you don't give people the upward mobility, then just don't. And there's a model where people, bummer for the LPs. They're just going to stop working and the fund's just going to stop, and it is what it is. And the LPs have to go find somebody else because that's their model, right?
Stephen mentioned Elad, and I think that is a great example of someone who's a franchise in so many parts of, hits so many parts of the definition, but probably unless something changes, when he decides to stop investing, it's not going to continue. And it's a wonderful place for LPs to put capital. So I think it does show you like you can have a lot of characteristics of a franchise, and it's really about what you want. Because if you don't want to be a franchise, then you're not going to want to build it and do all the parts of it that aren't investing that are, important for keeping something going. I think it's kind of interesting. More LPs are getting into venture. So will franchises endure longer than the data that you showed historically? Like, will there be more franchises that endure versus the historical data because more LPs are coming into the venture landscape with different return hurdles?
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder. Well, currently they're all aggregating into the same managers, so that have to start diversifying their investments, right? If GC and Andreessen, which might be an anomaly for this year, took in almost half the capital of the year, it's not exactly building more franchise funds, but maybe they'll distribute their dollars more evenly next year. Yeah, we keep tracking. I mean, it takes a while to know. Get back to you in 5 years.
Yeah, we can retape this podcast in 15 years.
We should have started in kindergarten. Anyway. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's so great to have you on. We're going to have to bring you back. I hope that's okay.
Thank you so much for having me. And I wish the very best to Nick's family. And I feel so grateful to be able to come on here. And until, Nick is back, I very much look forward to being part of this. It was just really, really fun and really special. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Minisode of Origins, the show where we discuss the venture capital ecosystem through the lens of a GP and an LP. Though in this episode, you got 2 LPs. We'll be back soon with the next episode in our mini-series on franchise funds, where we'll be joined by Jessica Archibald, LP at Top Tier Capital Partners. You can find that right here in this feed. And while you're there, please rate and review the podcast. It's super helpful for other folks looking for venture insights to find our show, and really helpful for Nick and I to know what you like and want more of, and what you'd like us to do less of. I'm Beezer Clarkson, and on behalf of my GP co-host Nick Charles, we'll be back soon. Thanks for listening.